The cost of living crisis is throwing the spotlight back on MPs' allowances, with one former politician branding them a sick joke. In New South Wales, it's hoped a tribunal report, expected to be released next week, will shed light on the cost to taxpayers.
Chris Minns had only been New South Wales Premier for 2 months when he promised
the government intends to introduce legislation to freeze politician and senior executive service pay. Over the next 4 years, it's anticipated we will save the New South Wales taxpayer $240 million.
Having vowed the savings would bolster the pay of frontline health workers, critics say his promise is melting.
They do this all the time. They'll signal a wage freeze in one area of their entitlements or in their so-called income and then jack up entitlements and payments by the taxpayer to themselves through any other method that they can.
That's because in June, the State Parliamentary Remuneration Tribunal upheld the freeze on MP salaries, but increased a number of allowances by a hefty 7% in line with CPI. Best explained, the key electoral allowance is intended to help politicians carry out duties for constituents, including the leasing and purchasing of a work vehicle, travel expenses, even buying raffle tickets. But it can also be misused.
Everyone's in a cost of living crisis, and reasonably Minns says, well, we won't increase salaries. But this is a backdoor way to do it, and it doesn't pass the sniff test.
Andrew Constance is a former Liberal Treasurer who built a reputation understanding community outrage.
At a time when families are just being belted, this is just another kick in the gut. I just wish the Premier would, quite frankly, grow a spine and put a freeze on this type of allowance in the same way that he has with the salary.
Former state politician turned Green Senator David Shoebridge points out what isn't spent can go into an MP's base salary.
The problem is in New South Wales, MPs can literally pocket that as a pay rise.
And the sums at Macquarie Street are serious. The base electoral allowance for those in here range from $56,000 to $162,000, and with perks climbs to $196,000, depending on the size of the seat.
If you're going to increase the electoral allowance to deal with inflation and costs of living, that should come with a requirement that every cent of that is actually spent on what it's meant to be. Communicating with the public, engaging with the public, not some kind of backdoor pay rise.
The funds haven't been used appropriately or they're still sitting there left over. Absolutely, it should go back into the system.
It's not just New South Wales, it's a national issue. Parliamentarians in Victoria are entitled to electoral allowances between $45,000 and $54,000. The maximum allowance in South Australia totalling more than $54,000 also. In Western Australia, the sum is between $88,000 and $113,000, while in Queensland, a combined electorate and communication allowance tops out at just over $100,000.
The money is needed, and I think for many MPs they spend a large amount of it, probably all of it. I know I certainly did, but there'll be some who, perhaps they're in a very safe seat and they're not a hard worker, and there's people like that out there who'll be pocketing the difference. They will be paying tax on the money that they don't spend.
Is that appropriate?
Well, yeah, I guess in the end of the day it isn't.
Former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman agrees the issue is all about community trust, expectations and transparency.
Do taxpayers have a right to know how much wasn't spent?
That's an interesting one. I know the politicians won't like that. Yeah, I think there's probably an argument to say that if not all of it was spent, that we know how much someone's underspending.
I think what you need to be careful of is creating some kind of super bureaucracy where every single, taxi receipt goes through a bureaucracy and it ends up costing the government 3 times as much to monitor it as it does to actually hand out with the allowance.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the New South Wales Premier distanced the leader from the allowances, saying the government is achieving millions of dollars in budget savings and stressing the review is undertaken by an independent body. He faces questions, though, with a report from the Parliamentary Remuneration Tribunal updating expenses and allowances due in coming days.
All we're asking for is to be able to easily see where our money is going and if politicians are spending it appropriately.
As those in the suburbs increasingly battle to get by. Jonathan Lee, Sky News.